Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be sharing with you guys how to make this princess dart bustier with a keyhole neckline. If this is something you are interested in, please keep on watching and let's get started with the video. So as you can see, I already drew out my horizontal lines on my paper. I first of all drew my shoulder line and I went ahead to draw my bust line, which is my bust point at 10 inches, my under bust at 13 inches, and my waist including the sewing allowance at 18 inches. So the first thing I'll be doing is to divide my shoulder by 2, which is 8 inches, and I'll also mark 3 inches for my neck width. So I'll come down by 1 inch for my shoulder slope, and I'll go ahead and I'll use my ruler to connect. So the next thing I'll do now is to take my armhole measurement, which is 8 inches. The formula is actually on the screen, and I'm just trying to make sure that it aligns on the paper, and I'm just going to connect like this, and I'll also connect like this. Right now, I'm going to divide my nipple to nipple measurement by 2, and I will add half an inch for allowance. My nipple to nipple measurement divided by 2 is 4 inches, and I'll add half an inch, which will give me 4.5. And I will mark it on my lines like this. I'll mark it all the way like this. Then I'll simply connect. So the next thing I will be doing now is to take my dart measurement, and by doing that, I'll first of all come down by 1 inch from my bust point, and I'll take 1.5 inches on both sides of my dart line, and by doing that I'll divide it by 2, which will give me 0.75 on both sides. So I'm just going to take the 0.75 on both sides of my line like this. You can as well use half an inch on both sides, but for me I'll be using 0.75 on both sides like this. So I will be connecting it like this. I'm just simply going to connect like this. So right now I'll be taking the depth of my neck, that's my neck depth, and I'll be using 3 inches. I'm just going to connect it. Then I'll also connect to my neck width like this. So the next thing I'll be doing is to divide my shoulder measurement by 2. So I'm just going to place my tape on it and divide it by 2, and whatever it gives me, I'm just going to mark the midpoint like this. So I'll simply use my ruler to connect it to my dart line. That point I made on my shoulder, I'll just connect it to my dart line like this. So right now I'll be taking my armhole curve, and what I'll do right now is to divide my armhole line like this, and it gave me 4 inches. Then I'll come out by half an inch. Then I'll simply connect that half an inch to the shoulder slope like this. Okay, before I draw the curve of my armhole, I'm just going to draw my chest line, which is 9 inches, and I will connect it this way. I'm just going to label it as my chest line. Then I'll divide my bust measurement by 4, which is 9 inches. Then I'm just going to connect that's my bust circumference. I'm just going to connect it to my armhole like this, which will make it my armhole curve. So right now I'll go ahead to draft my bustier pattern, and I'll go to my underbust line like this, and at my dart line I'll mark 2 inches on this side of my dart line, and this measurement varies depending on the bust size of the person. I'm a size 36, that's why I'm using 2 inches. For smaller bust sizes of 34, you can use 1.5 inches. For a size 32, you can use 1 inch. Then from size 38, 40, you can use 2.5 inches. So I'll be marking that 2 inches on this side like this. And at the other side, I'll be using 1 inch. Still on that my dart line, I'll be using 1 inch like this. So I'll be using my curved ruler to connect to that 1 inch I came down by on my bust point. I'll just connect it like this. Then I'll just also connect on the other side like this. It doesn't have to be curvy on the other side. So the next thing I will do is to use my ruler to connect to my dart line like this. I'm just going to connect it this way. So right now I'm going to measure where I want my bustier pattern to start from. So I'm going to use 6.5 inches. You can go lower or you can go higher, but don't go lower than the chest line. So right now I'm going to use my pencil to connect it together like this. So I'm about to mark the upper part of my bustier, and I'll be using 1.5 inches on both sides. So I'm going to divide that 1.5 inches into 2. It will give me 0.75, and I will be marking it on both sides like this. So if your bust size is from size 30, 32, 34, you can use half an inch on both sides, but my bust size is size 36, that's why I'm using 0.75 inches on both sides. So I will use my curved ruler to connect it like this. From my bust point, I'm just going to connect it like this. And I'll also connect the other side like this. It doesn't have to be as curvy as the first side. So I'm going to be using a sweetheart neckline for this bustier, and I'll just come down by 1.5 inches from where my bustier line started from. You can go lower or you can go higher than that, but I'm going to use 1.5 inches. Then I'll just use my curved ruler to connect it this way. I'll give it that sweetheart shape. Then I'll also use my curved ruler to connect it to the armhole like this. This will serve as my new armhole line. I'm just going to connect it this way. So the next thing I'll be doing is take my body measurement, and as you know, I've already taken my bust circumference on my armhole. Then this part, I'll just add it to my bust circumference, that 1.5 inches I took there to avoid shortage. I'm just going to add it to my bust circumference like this, before adding my 1.5 inches for my sewing allowance. So right now I'll divide my underbust circumference by 4, and it gave me 7.5, and I'm just going to mark it. And I'm also going to add this part to it to avoid shortage. Please always add that part to it. The excess you have there, please add it. Then I'll add my 1.5 inches for my sewing allowance. So I'll do the same thing for my waist measurement. I'll divide my waist by 4, and whatever it gives me, I'll add it to my waist. It gave me 8 inches. Then I'll also add the allowance I have there. I'm going to add it to it to avoid shortage, and I'll add 1.5 inches for my sewing allowance. So I'm just going to use my ruler to connect all the dots I made. So don't worry about how the shape looks right now. By the time we are done, you will see the final look of it. So at this point, all I just did was to mark my curve on my neck. Sorry, my camera didn't capture it very well. Well, I just marked the curve for the neck. So right now, I'll be cutting it out. And just watch closely how I cut it. So right now I'm just going to make a slight curve around here for those using a yoke for their bustier. I'm just going to make a slight curve there, and I'm just going to cut that part out like this. And I'm also going to cut out the armhole. Since I'm using the upper part for my yoke, I'm just going to cut out the armhole. So next I'll be cutting out the neck. So right now I'm cutting out the shoulder, and as you can see, I already added half an inch for my allowance for my shoulder. So we are done drafting, and this is what it looks like. This is what the front pattern of my bustier looks like, as you can see. So for the back, I already drafted out my basic body pattern, and I left 1.5 inches for my zipper allowance, as you can see. And the next thing I went ahead to do is mark my shoulder to my bust point, which is 10 inches. My shoulder to my under bust is 13, and my shoulder to my waist is 16 inches, including 2 inches for my sewing allowance. So the next thing I did was to mark my dart measurement, which is my nipple to nipple divided by 2, which gave me 4 inches. So I came down by 1 inch for my bust point here, and I marked half an inch on both sides for my dart. I drew a straight line to connect, and I used my ruler to also connect. Then for my armhole, I divided my bust circumference by 4. I marked it at the armhole, and I used my ruler to just connect this way. So for the type of neckline I want to use at the back, I'll simply mark 3 inches from my zipper allowance right on my chest line. I'll just mark 3 inches like this. So I'll be using my ruler to extend my neckline like this. I'm just going to extend it to the zipper allowance. So from my chest line, I'll simply come up by half an inch all the way to that 3 inches I marked, and I will use my ruler to connect. So I'll just use my ruler to connect from that 3 inches to the 0.75 inches I marked on my zip allowance. I'm just going to connect it like this. So I already divided my bust measurement by 4 on my armhole. Right now I'm taking my body measurement. So I'm just going to add 1.5 inches for my allowance, and I'll mark my under bust circumference divided by 4. Whatever I have, which is 7.5. I'll add whatever it is I have there to it. Then I'll add 1.5 inches for my sewing allowance. I'll do the same thing for my waist. I'll divide my waist by 4. Then whatever I have here, which is about 1 inch, I'm going to mark it and add 1.5 inches for my sewing allowance. So I'll just go ahead and use my ruler to connect it like this. So right now I'll go ahead and cut it out. Please watch how I'm cutting it. So I'll add about half an inch for my allowance on my shoulder like this, and I'll just connect it to the neck. I'm just cutting it out now. So I'm done cutting, and this is what it looks like. As you can see, all I need to do is just place my material on fold and cut out like this. So I'm about to cut on my material, and as you can see, my material is folded into two, and I'm just going to place my bustier pattern on it and cut it out. So for the middle part of my bustier, I'm also going to fold my material into two. As you know, this one is just one piece. I'm just going to cut it out the same way. So right now I'm also cutting out the back, and I folded it into two also to cut it out. So I'll just go ahead and divide the zipper allowance into two like this. And this is what the back looks like. So I'm going to be padding this bustier, and I'm going to be using this for it. It's called a warden. This is the it's not the very hard one anyways, it's just medium, and it's not very soft either. So you can just go to the market and ask for it. Then I'll just place it on top of, I'll place my material on top of it like this from my under bust. I'm just going to place it on top like this, and I'll cut it out. So this is what it looks like after cutting it, as you can see. Then I'll go ahead and remove about half an inch from it. This is because when I'm stitching with my lining, I don't want the wording to be there. So I'll just remove half an inch, and this is what it will look like. So I'll also go ahead and place the side of my bustier. I'll place it on top of my wording like this, and I'll also cut directly at my under bust. I'm just going to trim it out like this. So I'm cutting two pieces for both sides. So at this point, I'm just going to shift this one a little bit because I don't want the wording to get to the allowance or where I'm going to stitch my bodies. So I'm going to shift it a little bit, and this is what it will look like. This is for both sides of my of the side of my bustier. And I'll also do the same thing and trim off about half an inch at the top of the wording. So this is the final look. As you can see, please make sure when you are placing it on your material, you are placing the part that has the gum effect on it so that you don't make a mistake. So right now I'm done ironing, and this is my lining. As you can see, I added a paper stay on my lining to give it some kind of effect. And what I'll do right now is to pin the sides of my bustier together so that I can go to my sewing machine to attach them. So I'll just pin it together like this. It's going to pin everything together. So I'm also gonna ahead to pin the second side of it, and this is what it looks like. I'll just go to my sewing machine to attach it, and I'll also go to my sewing machine to attach the lining also. So I'm done attaching, and this is what it looks like. As you can see, the bustier cup is already coming out even without ironing it. So I just went ahead to notch. I've already notched it, as you can see, so that I can iron it properly. So right now I'm going to iron the cup side of the bustier. I'm just going to press it down like this to give it the cup effect. So I'm just going to iron. So I'll go ahead and flip it over on my breast ball, and I'll also press it down. So this is what it looks like after ironing. Can you see how beautiful it looks? And I also went ahead to iron the lining the same way. So I went ahead to iron paper stay on the lining for the back of my bustier, and this is what it looks like. So I'll place my material on my lining this way. I'll just place it on top like this, and I'll go ahead to run a stitch on it this way. I'll just run a stitch. I'll sew the neck first, then I'll go ahead and sew the sides like this. So the next thing I'll be doing is to cut out the keyhole for my bustier. I remember this yoke we removed when we were drafting the bustier pattern. I'm just going to fold my material into two like this, and I'll place that yoke on top and cut it out. I'll just place it on top. I'll cut it exactly the same way. I'm just going to cut it out before cutting out the keyhole for it. Just watch how I'm doing it. So to cut out the keyhole, I'm just going to fold my bustier pattern into two and pin it down like this. As you can see, I already pinned it down. Then I'll also pin down the yoke, and I'll place my bustier on top of my yoke like this. Just watch how I'm doing it. I'm just going to pin it round. So after pinning it down, the next thing I will do is to come down from my neck width. I will use 2.5 inches, including my allowance, including my sewing allowance. I'm going to use 2.5 inches. So I'll come to this line of my bustier. I can maybe extend it by 1 inch. I can use 1 inch. You can extend it if you want to, but I'm using 1 inch. Like this. Then I'll remove the pin since I've marked it out. I'll remove the pin, then I'll just make a slight curve to meet that 1 inch that I marked. Then I'll simply use my scissors to cut it out. So at this point, I decided to stop directly on the line of my bustier. That's why you can see that I'm not marking on that 1 inch that I marked. So you can decide to leave it like that either ways. So this is it. This is the keyhole. So I'm going to be cutting out 2 pieces for it. I'm just going to cut out 2 pieces so that I can use it to turn the first one. So I'll just cut out 2 pieces like this. I'll pin it down like this so it doesn't shift. So after cutting, these are the 2 pieces for my keyhole neckline, and I'll just go to my sewing machine and sew the neck. I'll just go and sew the neck by about 1/2 inch, and I'll also sew the keyhole part of the bustier. So I'm done sewing, and you can see this is what it looks like. I also went ahead to iron it. This is the neck. So I'm about to attach it to my bustier, I'm going to be using my lining to turn the both of them together. So just watch how I do this. So right now, watch how I place my keyhole on my material. I'm just going to place it close to that line of my bustier like this. I'll make sure I place it correctly. I'll just place it close to it. Since I removed about 1 inch, I'll place it like this and I'll pin it down. I'll also use my lining. I'll place my lining on top of it. Remember, the keyhole is in the middle of the lining and the bustier pattern. So I'll just place it like this. I'll place it close to it like this, and I'll place my lining on top. So I've gone ahead to turn it. As you can see, this is what it looks like. This is what it looks like. So I'm actually making a gown with this bustier pattern, and if you want to continue watching, please continue. And what I'll do right now is to notch the middle of my bustier, and I'll notch the middle of my skirt like this. I'm going to be dropping a link on how to draft a straight skirt in the description, just in case you want to make a gown out of this bustier pattern. So I'm just going to go ahead and pin it down like this, so I can go to my sewing machine to sew together. I'm going to use 1/2 inch to stitch both the skirt and the bustier pattern together. So for the back, I will go to my sewing machine and stitch the allowance. That's the 1.5 inches allowance. And I'm done stitching, and this is what it looks like, as you can see. So the next thing I'll be taking is my dart. So I'll come down from the shoulder by 10 inches, that's my shoulder to my nipple measurement, and I'll mark 4 inches, that's my nipple to nipple divided by 2. So I'll mark that all the way to the down part of my bustier. Remember, this is the back of the dress. Then I'll simply connect it like this. So I'm going to be coming down by 1 inch, and I'll also mark 1/2 inch on both sides of that line. I'm just trying to draw the dart line for the back of the dress. Then I'll simply connect it like this. So I'll just go to my sewing machine and run a stitch on that dart line that I made. So I did that on both sides, and this is what it looks like. And I'm going to be attaching the skirt part of this dress to the back. That's the back of the skirt. I'm going to be attaching it to the back of my bustier. So I'm just going to come and place it on top of on the back like this. I didn't add a lining to this skirt because the material is thick, so I didn't bother adding a lining to it. So I'll just place it like this on top of the skirt, and I'll run a stitch on it. I'm just going to pin it down first, as you can see, and I'll run a stitch on it of about 1/2 inch after pinning it down. So after doing that, I'm going to go ahead and attach my zip to the back of the dress. And I'm done attaching the zip. I'm just going to place the front and back piece of my dress together. I'm going to place it on top of each other like this. And I'll go ahead and attach the shoulder of the dress. So I'll go ahead and open up my material like this. I'll just open it up like this. I'll place them on top of each other, and I'll run a stitch on it. I'll pin them down first so that it doesn't shift, and I'll run a stitch on it. Please, if you are confused about any part of the video, you can pause it and replay. So I'm done attaching the shoulder of my front and my back piece together, and I also went ahead to attach the front and back piece together using my body measurement. I used an hook and eye for this part of the back of the dress. You can use a press button if you want to, and I'll just go ahead and iron it. And we've come to the end of today's tutorial. If you enjoyed the video, please don't forget to like and subscribe, and you can also share the video. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in my next video. Bye.